You ever have one of those moments where your own kid, the one you raised, decides to put you on blast right in front of a whole crowd? Yeah, that was me at my daughter's wedding reception. 200 people watching while she roasted me like it was open mic night. At first, everyone was laughing, but let me tell you, about 30 seconds later, the whole place went dead quiet. Now picture this, a beautiful wedding venue, sparkling chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, guests dressed to the nines. My daughter Sophia looked absolutely breathtaking in her white gown, and I was sitting there, proud as could be, watching her marry the love of her life. Everything about the reception felt perfect, until she grabbed the microphone. I figured she was about to give a sweet thank you speech. Instead, she flashed a smile at the crowd and said, "I want to talk about my mom for a minute. She's going through what I guess you'd call a late life crisis." The room chuckled. Then she added, "At 60 years old, she's decided she wants to build an empire." And she even threw in those little air quotes with her fingers, which got the whole place laughing even harder. People in our family have been teasing me for a while, telling me I should just act my age, but I never paid much attention to them. So there I was, smiling on the outside, while inside it felt like I was dying a little as 200 people laughed at what she called my midlife crisis. What they didn't realize, Sophia included, was that while they were busy mocking me, the so-called crazy old lady, who refused to fade into the background, the most powerful person in that room was quietly sitting at table 6. Because what happened next involved Sophia's new husband's boss, nearly choking on his champagne as he looked at me in shock, and then blurting out 5 words that would change my life. But before I tell you exactly how my daughter's wedding turned into one of the most satisfying moments of vindication I've ever experienced, I need to back up about 2 years and explain how this all began. Oh, and before I go on, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe to the Never Too Old channel. We're building a community for people who know that life doesn't end at 50, 60, or even 70. In fact, some of the best chapters can start then. Alright, back to the story. 2 years earlier, I was Laura Bennett, 60 years old, newly divorced, and honestly, pretty lost. After 30 years of working as an office manager, I'd been laid off during a company restructuring. Which, let's be honest, is just a polite way of saying they pushed out the older folks and replaced us with younger, cheaper employees. For the first time in decades, I was completely on my own. Sophia, my daughter, was 32 at the time and living with her fiancé, Jake. My ex-husband had already remarried a woman 15 years younger than me, because apparently that's the standard midlife crisis playbook for men. And there I was, sitting in my little apartment, staring at the walls and wondering what the heck I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. Now, here's the thing about being 60 and unemployed, you've really only got 2 choices. You can either believe your best years are already behind you, or you can decide that maybe, just maybe, all that experience you've built up over decades is worth something. I chose the second option. I started my own consulting business, helping small companies improve their operations and run more efficiently. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid work, stuff I'd mastered after 30 years of keeping offices afloat. I called it DT Enterprises. Clean, professional, and it kept my personal name out of the spotlight. The only problem? Nobody in my family took it seriously. Sophia rolled her eyes every time I mentioned landing a new client. "Mom, you're 60, not 23. Maybe it's time to act your age," she'd say. Jake was even worse, constantly mansplaining basic business terms to me, like I was some kid playing dress-up. "Have you thought about just finding a normal job instead of this little entrepreneur phase?" he'd ask. Even my sister chimed in during family dinners. "Laura, you missed your chance. Just accept it and find something stable." My friends weren't much better. They'd smile and say things like, "It's cute that you're trying," but then quickly remind me that realistically, starting fresh at my age didn't make much sense. The part that stung the most was this: I was actually good at what I was doing. Not just decent, really good. My clients were thriving, contracts were piling up, and I was making more money than I ever had as an office manager. But every time I shared a win, my family would pat me on the head like I was a toddler who'd managed to tie her shoes. Meanwhile, Sophia was knee-deep in wedding planning, and she made it very clear that she didn't want me talking about my business in front of Jake's colleagues. "Please don't embarrass me by telling people you're an entrepreneur," she said. "Just say you're between jobs or something." And because I loved her and wanted her wedding day to go smoothly, I agreed. But sitting there, quietly paying for half of the wedding expenses that nobody knew about, while listening to her friends joke about my so-called midlife crisis, something hit me. My family wasn't just unsupportive. They were ashamed of me for daring to keep fighting, for refusing to fade quietly into the background. And that cut deeper than any layoff ever could. When the big day finally arrived, it really was picture perfect. Sophia had chosen a breathtaking venue, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a lush garden. I had chipped in for a large part of it, though she assumed the money came from my divorce settlement instead of my thriving business. That morning, I picked out my outfit carefully. Elegant but not flashy, classy without drawing too much attention. The last thing I wanted was to steal even a sliver of the spotlight from my daughter. At the rehearsal dinner, she had reminded me again, "Just blend in, Mom. Jake's boss, Mr. Callahan, will be there with his wife, along with a bunch of people from his tech company. These are serious business folks, so please don't go on about your little projects." I bit my tongue and nodded. Little projects. Sure. The ceremony was beautiful. Sophia looked like a princess, Jake seemed over the moon, and I cried happy tears as I watched her step into this new chapter of her life. During cocktail hour, I mingled quietly with relatives, staying well away from Jake's work circle. Still, I couldn't help overhearing their conversations. These people were sharp, discussing big business deals, market strategies, and recent acquisitions in the tech world. I actually knew more about their industry than they probably guessed, but I kept that to myself. When someone introduced me as the bride's mother, I just smiled politely, nodded, and let the conversation move along. Then came dinner. Everything was going smoothly, good food, good wine, until Sophia's maid of honor stood up to give her speech. At first, it was sweet. She talked about her friendship with Sophia, how beautiful the wedding was, all the usual stuff. But then she grinned and said, "Now I have to talk about the bride's family, especially Sophia's mom, who's been quite the character lately." The crowd chuckled, and my stomach sank. "Laura's going through what I guess you'd call a late-life crisis," she continued, and the laughter grew louder. "At 60, she's decided she wants to build an empire." She even threw in finger quotes, and I just wanted to crawl under the table. "We keep telling her to act her age, but she won't listen. She's out here trying to compete with people half her age in business." More laughter. "But hey, at least she's keeping busy. Most moms her age are just gardening, right?" By then, the whole room was laughing. 200 people cracking up at my expense while I sat there with a smile frozen on my face, cheeks burning with humiliation. The maid of honor finally wrapped it up with, "We love our delusional mom anyway," and the crowd broke into applause. But honestly, the worst part wasn't the speech itself, it was Sophia's face while it was happening. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't trying to cut her friend off. She was laughing. Laughing and nodding along, like it was the most normal thing in the world to make me the punchline at her wedding. When the maid of honor sat back down, Sophia stood up to give her own speech. I thought maybe she'd balance things out, say something kind about me. But no, she doubled down. "Thanks for that, Chloe. Yes, my mom has definitely been on quite an adventure lately," Sophia said into the mic. "She keeps insisting she's building a business empire, but we're just trying to get her to accept that some dreams have expiration dates. When you're over 60, maybe it's time to be realistic about what you can actually accomplish." The room roared with laughter again. Jake's colleagues were practically wiping tears from their eyes. Mr. Callahan, the boss, just shook his head with an amused grin. Even the servers collecting plates were biting their lips, trying not to laugh. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. I wanted my daughter to stop tearing me apart in public. But most of all, I wanted the humiliation to end. Sophia kept going. "But hey, we support Mom's hobby anyway. Even if it means listening to her talk about client meetings and business strategies like she's some kind of CEO. The dismissive way she said it broke something inside me. This wasn't just a lack of support, it was cruelty. And she was doing it in front of everyone who mattered to her new husband's career. People who could have been valuable connections for my business, if only they knew the truth. As Sophia wrapped up to thunderous applause, I felt hollowed out. I told myself I'd slip out quietly after dinner, maybe claim I wasn't feeling well. I didn't want to cause any drama on her big day, even though my heart felt like it had been trampled on. But the night wasn't done with me yet. After Sophia's speech, people started trickling over to my table. Their voices were syrupy sweet, but every word dripped with condescension. "Good for you for trying something new at your age," Jake's aunt said, patting my shoulder like I was a brave little girl who'd just scraped her knee. "It's never too late to chase dreams, even small ones," another guest added with a pitying smile. My neighbor started selling jewelry at 60. Made almost $300 last year. Jake's colleagues weren't much better. Whenever someone introduced me as the bride's entrepreneurial mother, they'd nod politely, then immediately change the subject. I could see it in their eyes. "Oh, another middle-aged woman with a cute little side hustle." One of them even said, "That's wonderful. My mother-in-law started making crafts on Etsy. It keeps her busy," like I was some charity case who just needed a hobby to pass the time. And then came the absolute low point. During cocktail hour, Jake pulled me aside. "Laura, thanks for being such a good sport about the speeches," he said. "I know Sophia was just having fun, but I didn't want you to feel bad about your consulting thing." "My consulting thing?" I repeated. "Yeah, you know," he said casually, "it's great that you're staying active and trying new things. I just hope you're not putting too much pressure on yourself to make it into something big. At your age, it's really more about staying engaged than building a career, right?" I stared at him. This was my son-in-law. The man my daughter chose. And he was basically telling me to know my place. "Jake," I said carefully. "What exactly do you think I do?" He shrugged. "Some kind of small business consulting? Sophia mentioned you help local shops with their paperwork or something. Which is nice. Every little bit helps when you're starting over later in life. Local shops. Paperwork. Starting over later in life." I excused myself and went to the restroom, where I sat in a stall and tried not to cry. My own family thought I was just an amateur playing at business. They had no clue that in the past 18 months, I'd acquired 6 companies. 6. Including a major tech firm probably worth more than Jake would make in his entire career. When I finally came back out, I overheard Sophia talking to one of her bridesmaids by the bar. "Poor mom," she was saying. "She's been so lost since the divorce. This whole business thing is just her way of feeling important again. We don't have the heart to tell her it's never going to be anything real." "That's so sad," her friend replied. "But at least she's keeping busy instead of being one of those depressing empty nest moms who calls their kids every day." "Exactly," Sophia said. "Honestly, I'd rather have her playing entrepreneur than dating again." Can you imagine? When I heard Sophia and her friend laughing at me by the bar, something inside me cracked. This wasn't just about being underestimated anymore. My own daughter honestly believed I was some sad, middle-aged woman, clinging to scraps of relevance. She thought my success was a fantasy, my ambition was delusion, and everything I had achieved was nothing more than a desperate grab for attention. The irony nearly knocked the wind out of me. Sophia worried I might turn into one of those lonely empty nest moms who call their kids every day. But the truth was, while she was pitying me, I had already built something real, something bigger than she could even imagine. While she was embarrassed for her colleagues to meet her entrepreneurial mom, that same mom had quietly accomplished more than anyone else in that ballroom. I made it through dinner with my practiced smile plastered on, nodding politely as person after person offered me their kind, but insulting little nuggets of advice about staying realistic at my age. I decided I'd slip out after the cake cutting, fake a headache, and leave the newlyweds to enjoy their party. My heart was already too bruised to take any more. But then something happened I absolutely didn't see coming. During the mingling after dinner, Mr. Callahan himself, Jake's boss, walked straight over to me. I'd been actively avoiding him all evening. The last thing I wanted was to suffer through another polite conversation about my cute little consulting hobby. "Mrs. Bennett," he said politely, extending his hand. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Daniel Callahan, Jake's supervisor at Sterling Tech." Sterling Tech. My heart skipped a beat. "It's Miss Bennett, actually," I replied, steadying myself. "And yes, I know who you are." He smiled. "Jake mentioned you're in business consulting. That's wonderful. What kind of work do you do?" I studied Daniel Callahan for a moment, polite, composed, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. I realized right then this conversation was about to get very, very interesting. "Well, Mr. Callahan," I said carefully, "I work in acquisitions and operational consulting. I help companies streamline their efficiency and grow." He nodded politely, the kind of nod people give when they think they already know the answer. "That sounds fascinating. Mostly small local businesses, I imagine." "Actually," I said, watching his expression closely, "I focus on mid-sized companies in the tech sector. Firms that are ready to scale but need strategic guidance and capital investment." His eyebrows ticked upward. "Really? That's quite specialized. How long have you been in that field?" "About 2 years seriously," I answered, "though I've been building toward it for a long time." "Impressive," he said. I could tell, though, that he still pictured me working on some tiny projects compared to what he was used to. "Have you worked with any companies I might know?" I paused. That was the moment, my chance to either keep hiding or finally tell the truth. After the humiliation I'd endured tonight, I was done hiding. "Actually, yes," I said. "I recently completed the acquisition of Sterling Technologies." The change in his face was instant. His polite smile froze, then drained away as his eyes widened. "Sterling Technologies?" "Yes," I said evenly. "The deal closed about 3 months ago." He stared at me, and I could see the gears turning in his head, connecting the dots. "Wait. Sterling was acquired by DT Enterprises." His voice dropped. "You're not saying?" "Yes. I am L. Bennett." The color left his face. "You're the L. Bennett. The L. Bennett who bought Sterling." "That would be me." He almost dropped his champagne. "Oh my God. I had no idea." When Jake said his mother-in-law was in consulting, I never imagined. He was stammering, completely thrown off balance. "Miss Bennett, I am so sorry. If I had known." "It's all right, Mr. Callahan," I said calmly. I like to keep a low profile. But he wasn't all right. I could see the panic in his eyes as he ran a hand through his hair. "No, this is mortifying. The way people have been talking to you tonight, treating you like..." He stopped, glancing around the room where people were still laughing about my little hobby. "Mr. Callahan," I said softly, "please don't worry about it." I chose not to correct anyone. "But you shouldn't have had to," he insisted. His voice dropped again. "Do you realize half the people in this room work for companies in your portfolio? They've been mocking your little consulting business when you literally own their employers." He shook his head in disbelief. And that's when it really hit me, he was right. I scanned the room and spotted them. Executives from 3 different companies I'd acquired just in the past year. Every single one had treated me like a delusional woman playing dress-up. "Mr. Callahan," I whispered, "I really don't want to make a scene. This is my daughter's wedding." But he wasn't letting it go. He leaned closer, his voice urgent. "With all due respect, people need to know. Do they even realize what you've accomplished?" "No," I admitted quietly. "They don't." He looked stunned. Your daughter doesn't even know her mother is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the industry? She thinks I help local shops with paperwork, I said. Local shops. His voice rose before he caught himself and lowered it. Miss Bennett, you've acquired 6 companies in 18 months. You're running a $50 million portfolio. You're not just successful, you're a powerhouse. I noticed heads beginning to turn toward us. Jake was watching with curiosity, probably wondering why his boss looked so serious talking to his hobby entrepreneur mother-in-law. Please, I said again, I don't want to take attention away from Sophia and Jake. But the conflict on his face was clear. The businessman in him was horrified by what he'd witnessed. In an industry where reputation meant everything, watching me be dismissed and laughed at was unbearable to him. I understand you want to protect your daughter's big day, he said finally. But Miss Bennett, this isn't just about respect as a parent. These people owe you respect as their boss. Boss? I echoed. He gestured subtly around the room. Jake works for Sterling Technologies, which you own. The Hendersons over there? They're with Quantum Solutions, which you acquired in January. The Patel couple? Data Flow Systems. That was your March acquisition. Half the people in this ballroom ultimately get their paychecks from companies you control. And right now, they're sitting here laughing about your so-called midlife crisis. I couldn't decide what I felt more, vindicated or heartbroken. On one hand, here was undeniable proof that I had built something real, something that mattered. On the other hand, it just reminded me how badly my own family had misjudged me and written me off. Callahan leaned in, lowering his voice. What's truly troubling, he said, is that your daughter mocked you in her speech, calling your business goals unrealistic. But the truth is, you've been anything but unrealistic. You've been remarkably successful. She simply has no idea. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Jake watching us. Then he started walking our way. Everything all right over here? He asked with a faintly nervous smile. You two look like you're having quite the heavy conversation. Callahan gave me a quick look, almost as if asking for my permission to continue. I gave him the smallest nod. I was tired of pretending. Jake, Callahan began carefully, I was just finding out more about your mother-in-law's consulting business. Oh, that? Jake said with a little chuckle, waving his hand. Yeah, Laura's been dipping her toes into business. Honestly, it's kind of cute how seriously she takes it. The look that spread across Callahan's face was priceless, like he couldn't believe what he just heard. Cute, he repeated slowly. Jake grinned, patting me on the shoulder like I was a child who'd drawn a decent crayon picture. Well, you know how it is. When someone starts over later in life, you have to encourage them, even if their goals are a bit optimistic. But don't worry, we all support Laura's little venture, don't we, Mom? Callahan just stared at him, stunned, like he was watching someone insult the president right to his face without realizing it. Jake, Callahan said at last, his voice firm and deliberate, I don't think you understand who you're talking about. Jake frowned. What do you mean? Callahan turned his eyes back to me. I gave him another slight nod. The secret wasn't going to stay hidden anymore. Your mother-in-law isn't dabbling in business, Jake. She is business. Laura Bennett is L. Bennett, the founder of DT Enterprises. She owns Sterling Technologies. She owns the very company we both work for. Jake's face went completely blank, like the words didn't compute. What? He finally croaked. She's not some small-time consultant helping corner shops, Callahan continued. She's acquired 6 major companies in the last 18 months, ours included. Jake, your mother-in-law isn't just in business. She's your boss's boss's boss. Watching Jake process that was like watching a man get hit by a truck in slow motion. His jaw moved, but no words came out. He stammered. That's impossible. She drives an old Honda. She lives in a small apartment. She chooses to, Callahan said firmly. Plenty of serious investors keep their lifestyle modest so they stay focused on the work instead of chasing appearances. By then, people around us had started noticing something big was going down. Curious heads were turning our way. Callahan realized the truth wasn't going back in the box, and honestly, after everything that night, I wasn't too upset about it. You know what? Callahan said, his voice rising. I think folks deserve to hear this. Before I could stop him, he strode up to the microphone. Excuse me, everyone, Callahan's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing across the hall. Sorry to interrupt, but I have something remarkable to share. The music died. Every conversation stopped. 200 sets of eyes turned toward him. I wanted to slide under the table and disappear, but it was too late. Ladies and gentlemen, Callahan continued, I just had an eye-opening conversation with the mother of the bride. And I owe her, and frankly all of you, an apology. Sophia was staring at him like she couldn't figure out why her new husband's boss was talking about her mother during the reception. You see, Callahan went on, we've all been treating Miss Bennet like some hobbyist dabbling in business for fun. We've patronized her, dismissed her achievements, and frankly, we've been downright rude. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's glass sweating onto the tablecloth. Every eye shifted toward me. What we failed to realize, Callahan said, his voice growing stronger, is that Laura Bennet is L. Bennet, the founder and CEO of DT Enterprises. She's one of the most successful entrepreneurs in our entire field. A gasp rippled across the crowd. A fork clattered to the floor. I heard Sophia choke on her own breath. In the last 18 months alone, she has acquired 6 major companies, Callahan added, including Sterling Technologies, where I serve as COO. She has built a business portfolio worth $50 million. While we've been treating her like she was playing dress-up, she was building an empire. The silence after that felt like a held breath. And then, chaos. What? Sophia shrieked, her voice cutting through the air. The room exploded into chatter. People whispered frantically. The Hendersons, who'd mocked my cute little business earlier, leaned into each other like the world was ending. The Patels looked like they'd seen a ghost. Jake just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Callahan wasn't done. One more thing, he said, clearly on a roll now. Roughly half the people in this room actually work for companies Miss Bennet now owns. So when we've been joking about her unrealistic business dreams, we were mocking our own boss. That's when the real panic set in. I watched people scramble in their minds, probably replaying every condescending word they'd thrown my way. One man who'd compared me to his crafty aunt turned pale, like he might be sick. Sophia's face was frozen, caught between shock and horror. She finally whispered, Mom? Is this true? Before I could say a word, Callahan spoke again. I think Miss Bennet should be the one to answer that. He handed me the microphone. 200 people went silent again, all waiting for me to speak. This was not how I had planned to spend my daughter's wedding. Well, I said, my voice trembling just a little. Yes, I admitted with a steady voice, it's true. I'm L. Bennet, the person behind DT Enterprises. The room erupted in another wave of gasps and chatter, but I kept right on talking. I know this probably blindsided a lot of you, especially my own family. The truth is, I've always preferred keeping a low profile. I'd rather let my work speak louder than my name plastered on headlines or public recognition. I locked eyes with Sophia, who stared back at me like she was seeing a stranger instead of her mother. Sweetheart, I said gently, the only reason you didn't know tonight is because you asked me not to talk about my business. You felt embarrassed, convinced I was tinkering with some little side hobby, so I honored your request and kept quiet. Her voice came out small now, almost a whisper. But Mom, you said you were just consulting for small businesses. I shook my head. No, I never said small business consulting. I said business consulting. You assumed small, because, I paused, searching for a careful way to say it, because you thought I was too old and inexperienced to ever do anything significant. The entire room froze so still you could have heard a pin drop. When you gave that speech earlier, talking about my supposed late-life crisis, you were mocking a business that actually employs more than 400 people across 6 companies. When you told me I was being unrealistic, you didn't realize those impossible dreams were already real. I kept my tone calm, but my words were firm. Jake finally spoke up, his face pale. Laura. I swear, I had no idea. I'm sorry. I feel like such a fool. I nodded. Jake, the truth is you assumed a woman my age couldn't possibly understand business better than you. Maybe that's something worth reflecting on. But the one I was really watching wasn't Jake. It was Sophia. My daughter looked crushed. Not proud. Not amazed. Just humiliated. Like my success had exposed her in the worst possible way. Mom, she whispered, why didn't you ever tell me? Because, honey, every time I tried to share good news, you rolled your eyes and shut me down. You said I was going through a midlife crisis. You told me dreams have expiration dates. And tonight, you begged me not to embarrass you by mentioning my work in front of your fiancé's colleagues. I gestured toward the room, realizing just how many of those colleagues actually worked for me. The look on everyone's faces said it all. They were scrambling to remember if they'd said anything nasty about that delusional old lady and her silly business ideas. That's when Callahan stepped forward again. If I may, he said. Ms. Bennett has been nothing but gracious tonight. A lesser person would have been furious at the comments tossed around earlier. Sophia's maid of honor, the same one who'd made the snide speech about my so-called crisis, looked ready to sink straight through the floor. What impresses me most, Callahan went on, is that Ms. Bennett chose to endure public ridicule rather than steal her daughter's spotlight with her own achievements. That takes remarkable character and love. Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears, but they weren't tears of joy. I leaned into the mic again. So, I hope you'll forgive the dramatic reveal. This isn't how I planned tonight to go, but sometimes the truth forces its way out. I turned to Sophia, softening my voice. Now, let's get back to celebrating this beautiful couple and their future. I handed the mic back to Callahan and sat down. Slowly, the buzz of conversation returned, but it was different now. People who had spent the evening patronizing me were suddenly approaching with wide eyes and respect. Ms. Bennett, said the man who had compared me to his craft-obsessed aunt, I owe you a huge apology. I had no clue. It's fine, I told him with a polite smile. Really? But it wasn't fine for Sophia. As the night wound down, she looked shattered. When she finally came to me, her eyes were red from crying. Mom, she said, voice breaking. I don't even know what to say. I feel awful. For the speech, for the way I treated your work, for everything. Sophia, sweetheart, this is your wedding day. Let's not let this overshadow it. But I humiliated you in front of everyone. And you just sat there and took it, because you didn't want to ruin my moment. What kind of daughter does that make me? The kind who cared more about saving face than knowing her own mother, I said evenly. Sophia, you stood up in front of 200 people and mocked me for not acting my age. You declared my dreams had expiration dates. That wasn't just a mistake, it was cruel. I kept my voice steady but unshakable. You weren't simply wrong about the facts. You chose to tear me down in public rather than stand beside me. We've got a lot to work through before things can feel normal again. The next morning, as Sophia and Jake left for their honeymoon, I knew the fallout from that night was going to shift our family forever. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. At 62, I had finally stopped letting anyone decide what I was too old to achieve. 6 months later, the ripple effects were still unfolding. Jake started addressing me as Ms. Bennett at family dinners, and suddenly he was all ears when I gave business advice. Amazing how respectful a son-in-law becomes when his job security depends on staying in my good graces. My sister, who used to lecture me about being realistic, now brags to her friends about having a successful entrepreneur for a sister. Funny how quickly the tune changes once success is undeniable. Sophia. That relationship took the longest to heal. She came back from her honeymoon expecting everything to reset. But I stuck to my boundaries. I even dragged my 34-year-old daughter to family therapy, because yes, at 62, I was done being disrespected by anyone, even my own child. The upside? 3 different wedding guests later hired me for consulting. Turns out being outed as a business powerhouse is pretty great advertising. Who knew? And Callahan? He eventually became one of my most trusted executives. Sometimes the best business partnerships are born out of champagne and shock. These days, when people ask about my late-life career shift, I just smile. Because if I've learned anything at 62, it's this: never underestimate a woman who's finally decided she's finished being underestimated. So that's my story. Tell me what you think. Was Sophia's public embarrassment fair payback, or should I have handled things differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.